We pick up with this presentation with the battles of the Peninsula and going through until the battles at Fredericksburg and then Chancellorsville. So, last we left off was the fall of New Orleans in the spring of 1862. So that is a positive for the Union. We now are going to pick up in the spring of 1862 in the east. The old commander of Irvin McDowell has been replaced, and there is a new commander, and he has a plan to go at Richmond a different way. So we begin with what is known as the Peninsula Campaign, or 7 Days, or the Battle for Richmond. So it's called the Peninsula Campaign because it is this idea of this assault on the peninsula between the James and York River down here in Virginia. So McClellan, who is the commander now, instead of approaching Richmond from the north and heading south overland, he decides he's going to bypass that and move his troops down the Potomac out to the Chesapeake, down here, and then fight his way up the peninsula and approach Richmond from the east, moving west. So the time period is more than just a day, more than just a week, more than just a month. We're talking several months, beginning in March and April and not culminating until the first weeks of the summer in July. So the Union commander, as we had spoken about, is this man, George B. McClellan. He is a graduate of West Point. He is commander of the Army of the Potomac. He is an up-and-coming, thinks a lot of himself, thinks of him as a young Napoleon, very good organizer. The Army really likes him. The Confederate commander eventually will be, obviously, Robert E. Lee. But this battle is important because this is the battle in which Robert E. Lee takes command of the main army in the east, known as the Army of Northern Virginia. So the dates again were beginning in the spring. McClellan moves that army down towards Virginia. Okay, he is then going to approach the peninsula and move up the peninsula towards Richmond. Okay, he does so pretty well. This is March and April, and then May and June. He's moving his forces up the peninsula until he reaches the outskirts. And then battles will occur outside of Richmond. You can sort of see the red would, of course, be the Confederates, and the blue, of course, is the Union, over 1 week. And those battles that occur over 1 week are going to be referred to as 7 days battle. So, talking about that, so he moves up the peninsula very slowly, and those slow movements allow the Confederates to prepare defenses. And so the Union is very close to Richmond, so close they can actually hear the church bells of the town. So they get right on the doorstep of one of their major objectives, is to capture Richmond, the enemy capital. And that is when then Robert E. Lee takes command, because the previous commander had been wounded, and he organizes the army, uses his cavalry commander, Jeb Stuart, and goes after the Union forces and organizes an effective offensive and pushes them all the way back down the very peninsula they had just spent the last 2 months fighting up. This is Jeb Stuart. It's his eyes and ears, as Robert E. Lee will refer to him. He's his reconnaissance wing, kind of going out and seeing what's happening. So, the Union, sadly, gets right on the doorstep and then is pushed further and further down the peninsula, all the way back to the area in which they had started months before. In the book, they do talk about Jeb Stuart being an important part of this battle, because he will use his cavalry to ride completely around McClellan's Army of the Potomac. So let me show you that. If you see these red arrows, this is the movement of his troops as they try and encircle and go around gathering tactical information about what is happening behind Union lines. So this is all hit ride around. So eventually Robert Lee takes command, and sadly the Union is at another defeat in the east. So they've lost in the summer of 1861 at First Bull Run. Now their major campaign in the summer of 1862 is another defeat. And so I did want to share just a few things that the book doesn't mention, is that this was the first time they ever used aerial reconnaissance. And yes, that's a hot air balloon. So this was used by the Union. It was called the Intrepid. And the idea is that they would tether a person in a balloon, that person would be able to go up and be able to scout and see what is happening on the Confederate sides. The man who comes up with it, his name's right here, it's Thaddeus Lowe. And so you can always see advances in technology during various parts of war. Now, the following month, in August, there is another battle. This one occurs at the same location as the previous battle a year before, and that is Second Bull Run. So it's at Manassas Junction. This occurs in August. The first one had occurred in the previous July. There's a new commander that's doing this. His name is John Pope. Here he is. But the sad fact is that he has no better success than the previous first commander. So the Confederate commanders are Lee and Jackson together, and they are able to overwhelm Pope's forces, and it's another humiliating defeat for the Union forces. We'll move on now to a major battle of the entire war, and that will be the Battle of Antietam. So Antietam has the same kind of background as Bull Run, that it's named for a creek near the battlefield in Sharpsburg, Maryland. This battle will occur September 17, 1862. The Union is going to be commanded by George B. McClellan, that's the Army of the Potomac, and for the Confederates, it's going to be Robert E. Lee. And Lee is going to change his tactics here. He's going to invade the North in an attempt to end the war. Remember, they're normally fighting defensively, but this time Lee is feeling good spirits. The army is in great shape, and they want to move towards ending this war effectively. And so eventually he doesn't make it too far into the North. He crosses the Potomac and is stopped at Sharpsburg, and the battle takes place. But his real target was actually Harrisburg. Making it there, he felt that he could capture a northern capital. It was a growing industrial place. That's why he was trying to make it towards Harrisburg. Now, the Battle of Antietam, its results, it's a one-day battle, but it's a terrible one in its cost. And it is the single bloodiest day in all of American history. And that's including up to the present day. The Union and Confederate forces will fight all day, almost 13 hours from sunup almost to sundown, with neither side gaining a tactical advantage. The figures you can see here for yourself. It's the single worst day in all of American history, and at the end of it, the Union can claim a victory because it has forced Robert E. Lee to do something that he has never done before, which is retreat. And so on the next day, Lee retreats across the Potomac back into the safety of Northern Virginia. The other reason why this is such an important battle is that Lincoln had been mulling around the idea of a proclamation to free the slaves of the South. He felt, and the country began to feel, that the slave population that was assisting the Confederacy was helping them to win the war. So as a president and a commander-in-chief, he can do great things to change and weaken his enemy. And that's even if his enemy is other Americans. And so he decides that he is going to change the focus of the war, and it's going to be a higher purpose, and that is the end of slavery as we know it in the United States. So he basically will issue the Emancipation Proclamation about a week after the battle. So following this battle, due to McClellan's hesitancy, his slowness, his failure to act, Lincoln has had enough of him and removes him from command. And so McClellan is fired by Lincoln, and there is a new Union general in charge. So this ends sort of the fall of 1862, if you've been keeping track of the time period. So we move to the next battle, which strangely enough occurs in December. And it's very unusual to have battles that late in the year. It's hard to move armies. Armies move by horsepower. It means you have to take feed and food, and it's just it's just difficult. And so we move to a different battle, and this one is going to be known as the Battle of Fredericksburg. So the new Union commander is again going to strike out towards Virginia and the capital at Richmond. So if you're looking over here at the map, Richmond would be right about here. So he's going to move overland and go from DC and come down, and he is going to try and attack here at a place known as Fredericksburg, Virginia. So, the generals for the Union is Ambrose Burnside is his name. Take a look here. Ambrose is a very unique looking individual. Really a nice guy. You can disregard the Q there. That's another thing. And he wore his facial hair in such a strange way that people began to refer to this style as Burnsides. And yes, that's where we get sideburns. And for the Confederates, again, it is good old Robert E. Lee. And so what we have here is that as Union soldiers march down towards Fredericksburg, they're going to have to try and cross a river that's right in front of Fredericksburg. And the problem is this river doesn't have a bridge. So they're going to have to actually build a bridge, a floating pontoon bridge, while under fire. So what you actually see here, this is a sketch from a Civil War artist that was there, as these engineers are attempting to build a floating pontoon bridge, all the while being under fire by Confederate sharpshooters. And you can sort of see it here. So this is basically a one-day battle that's going to occur in December of 1862. Now, the Confederates delayed the movement of Union, and then what they did was entrench themselves on the high ground outside of this small town. And since they were entrenched on that high ground, the Union Army realized that they would have to make an assault up that hill to attempt to dislodge Lee's army. Let me just show you a picture of that. So this is just an artist drawing. So back here, these would be Union lines, and then up here across the top would be Confederate lines. And so, just again, this is actually a photograph that the Confederates were lined up here behind this stone wall, and then this place was known as Mary's Heights, and the Union was forced to come up this hill to try and dislodge the Confederate army that was at the. So during this battle, Burnside orders his men to take those heights on the opposite side of the river, and they do as ordered, and they go 10 times up the hill. And each time they lose more and more of their men on this field because the Confederates are firing at them from behind a stone wall that was anywhere from 3 to 4 feet high. And so thousands of men lay wounded on the field in front of this wall during that night of December 13th, 1862. And so what happens is one of those amazing things in warfare where something terrible is happening, but you also have something amazing happening. And what's happened is a Confederate officer asks to jump the wall and go over and give aid to the fallen soldiers that were there in front of the wall. So what happens is that this officer jumps the wall and realizes that there are Union sharpshooters on the other side, but he has a bunch of canteens, and he goes from soldier to soldier and is known as the Angel of Mary's Heights. And so here in the background was that wall that he was behind before, and he spends almost an hour going between the various troops that are out there hoping for someone to come and give them aid. And so he's known as the Angel of Mary's Heights. If you go to the Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, there's actually a depiction of that right at the entrance to it. A lot of people think it's from the Battle of Gettysburg, but it is not. It's actually from the Battle of Fredericksburg. So it's called A Moment of Mercy. Alright, this is the Angel of Mary's Heights, Richard Kirkland, and sadly he does not survive the war. He's killed in action later in the war in 1864. So, importance of the battle? Well, again, another humiliating defeat for the Union Army. Burnside withdraws from Fredericksburg, retreats back to Washington, D.C. He then quits. Our last battle is the Battle of Chancellorsville. So, Chancellorsville is not a place. It's named after a mansion that was near the battlefield, the Chancellor Mansion. So that's why it's called the Chancellorsville. So, there is a new Union general because Ambrose Burnside has quit, and his name is Joe Hooker, Fightin' Joe Hooker from Massachusetts. And so he is now Army Commander of the Army of the Potomac. The Confederate is the same. It's Robert E. Lee. And with him, of course, is Thomas J. Jackson. Okay, so some important facts about the Battle of Chancellorsville. This is going to occur in the spring of 1863. So It's a several-day battle. It is down in Virginia. Okay, it is a overwhelming Confederate victory, and Lee considers it his most perfect victory. And he does what is unexpected. He divides his men in the face of an enemy, not once but twice, and is able to basically defeat a superior force with inferior men. It's also his greatest loss. And the reason for that is that Stonewall Jackson is accidentally killed by his own troops on the last night of the battle. He's not killed instantly. He is riding the lines with his men, trying to scout some positions. As he turns around and comes back to his own lines, they think it's the Union, and they fire at him and his group, and he is wounded. He has his arm amputated. He kind of lingers for a few days and then actually dies of infection. So the Confederacy is going to take this as his next opportunity to invade the North once again. That's key. So here, of course, is a good picture, and this is an interesting quote, and I'll end it here. When Lee learns of the wounding of Jackson and the loss of his left arm, he is rumored to say, "He has lost his left arm, and I have lost my right." When he learns of Jackson's death, he is beside himself. He goes and weeps in his tent for hours. This is his burial site in Lexington, Virginia, and they actually even buried his arm. Yep, they buried his arm after they realized that that was General Jackson's arm. So we'll end it here, and we'll pick up with the next one with the Battle of Gettysburg.